The wind came screaming across the plains like it had a score to settle, rattling the shutters of the old ranch house and bending the tall prairie grass low, as if the earth itself were bowing to something fierce and unseen. And inside that house a woman stood by the window with her hands clenched in her skirts, staring out at a horizon that had never once promised her mercy. Her voice barely more than breath when she said, "You married me out of pity," and the words seemed to hang between her and the tall cowboy by the door, like smoke from a dying fire. He did not answer at first. He only removed his hat, slow and respectful, revealing wind, tangled dark hair, and eyes the color of storm clouds rolling over distant hills. The kind of eyes that had seen cattle drives through drought and gunfights under merciless suns, and yet those eyes softened when they rested on her. She stood small but unbroken, her pride stitched tight as the seams of her worn dress. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried the steady weight of a man who knew the value of truth. "Out of love, ma'am," pure and certain as sunrise over the range. The ranch outside those walls had known hardship long before she ever stepped foot upon it. Fences sagged from years of dust storms, the barn leaned like an old drunk remembering better days, and cattle wandered thin across fields that once rolled green and proud. He had fought to keep it alive after his father passed, with nothing but debts and a name. That folks in town spoke with cautious respect, and when she arrived months ago with a single trunk and sorrow trailing behind her like a shadow at dusk, the town had whispered that she was broken goods, that no man would take her without pity weighing heavy in his chest. But he had watched her from the first morning she walked into the mercantile in town, chin lifted despite the sideways glances, fingers steady as she counted coins for flour and sugar. There had been no begging in her posture, no plea in her eyes, only a quiet determination that stirred something deep in him, something stronger than the need for land or legacy. And when circumstances forced her into marriage to save her from being turned out into the unforgiving wilderness alone, he had stepped forward not as a savior seeking praise, but as a man answering a call only he could hear. Their wedding had been small, held beneath the wide Texas sky with only a preacher and 2 witnesses squinting against the sun. No lace veil, no polished shoes, just dust swirling around worn boots and the faint scent of sage in the air. Folks from town watched from a distance as if expecting tragedy instead of vows, and she had stood beside him stiff as a fence post, believing every murmur that claimed he was rescuing her out of charity, believing she was nothing more than a burden he carried because his heart was too soft to refuse. Now, months later, the silence between them felt heavier than any cattle gate he had ever lifted. She turned from the window and faced him fully, eyes bright, not with anger but with fear, the kind born from too many nights spent alone and too many doors closed in her face. "I see how they look at you," she said, "how they clap your shoulder and call you noble, like you'd done some grand deed by tying yourself to a woman with no dowry and no good name left. I never wanted to be your charity case, never wanted to be the weight that drags you down into whispers." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, boots thudding against wooden planks scarred by years of spurs and storms, and he stopped just short of touching her, giving her space as a gentleman ought, because love to him was never about possession but about choice. "Ma'am," he said again, softer this time, "when I asked you to marry me, I did it knowing full well what folks would say. I did it knowing the ranch was already hanging by a thread. I did it because every time you walk into a room the air changes, because you stand straighter than any man I know, because when you smile at the calves in spring, it feels like the world might yet turn kind again." Her breath caught as the wind outside eased into a low, mournful hum. She searched his face for mockery and found none, only that steady, unwavering truth that had carried him through blizzards and blazing summers alike. "You think I don't see how you rise before dawn to mend fences so I can sleep a little longer," he continued. "You think I don't notice how this house feels warmer since you filled it with your quiet strength. Pity is a thin, weak thing. It don't build barns or mend hearts. Love does that. And I married you because loving you felt as natural as breathing this wide open air. Because from the first moment I saw you standing alone against a town full of doubt, I knew I would rather fight beside you than ride easy without you." And in that small, battered ranch house beneath a restless western sky she felt the first crack in the wall she had built around her heart, a crack wide enough for hope to slip through. The next morning broke sharp and pale over the prairie, frost clinging stubborn to fence posts and the breath of cattle rising like ghostly prayers into the cold dawn air. She stepped onto the porch with a shawl wrapped tight around her, shoulders and watched him saddle his horse with the quiet efficiency of a man born to the saddle. The words he had spoken the night before, still echoing in her chest. Yet doubt had a way of settling back in like dust after a storm, and as he mounted up and tipped his hat toward her, she wondered if love alone could withstand the trials this land always demanded. By midday the sky shifted from clear blue to a bruised gray that rolled heavy over the plains, thunder muttering low and restless beyond the distant hills. Word came riding fast from a neighboring ranch that rustlers had been spotted driving cattle toward the river, and the fragile piece of their small world cracked open like dry earth beneath pounding rain. He did not hesitate. He gathered his rifle and called for 2 hired hands, and before he rode out he looked back at her standing firm in the yard. Her chin high, though fear flickered behind her eyes. "Stay inside, ma'am," he said gently. "This won't take long." But storms in the west rarely kept to promises. Wind tore across the range with sudden fury, rain slashing sideways against barn walls, and she refused to cower behind closed doors while her husband faced danger alone. She pulled on boots, still stiff from disuse, and stepped into the tempest, moving among the cattle with a calm steadiness that surprised even herself, guiding them toward shelter with soft calls and careful hands, her skirts soaked and clinging, hair plastered against her cheeks. Yet her spirit burned brighter than the lightning splitting the sky overhead. Out near the riverbank, the confrontation came swift and violent. Gunshots cracking against thunderclaps, horses rearing as mud churned beneath pounding hooves. He rode straight into the chaos with a focus honed by years of defending what little he owned. Rustlers scattered when they recognized him, knowing his aim was true and his resolve stronger than any storm. And when at last silence returned, broken only by the rushing river and distant thunder, he found himself thinking not of victory, but of her, hoping she had stayed safe within the walls he had tried to build around her. When he rode back toward the ranch soaked to the bone and streaked with mud, the sight that met him stopped him cold. There she stood at the barn doors, hair wild from wind, sleeves rolled high, guiding the last frightened calf into shelter with hands gentle yet unyielding. The storm had not broken her. It had revealed her, and pride surged through him stronger than any triumph over thieves. Because she had not been rescued, she had risen. "You should have stayed inside," he said once he dismounted, though there was no anger in his tone, only awe mingled with lingering fear, and she met his gaze steady and sure. "This is my home too," she replied, the words simple, yet powerful as a rifle shot across open land. "I won't hide while you fight for it." And in that moment something shifted between them. No longer a marriage shadowed by whispers of pity, but a partnership forged in rain and resolve. The days that followed brought talk in town, stories of how she had faced the storm and stood guard over the herd while he drove off rot. The same mouths that once muttered about charity now spoke her name with reluctant respect. Yet it was not their approval that warmed her heart. It was the way he looked at her across the supper table, not as a burden born from obligation, but as an equal. As a woman whose strength matched his own in ways quieter yet no less fierce. That night, as the prairie settled into a hush broken only by crickets and the distant howl of coyotes, they sat side by side on the porch steps, watching the last flickers of lightning fade beyond the horizon. She leaned into him without hesitation, no longer bracing for rejection, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders as natural as breathing. "You still think I married you out of pity?" he asked softly. And she shook her head against his chest, the steady beat of his heart, stronger than any rumor. "I reckon I was wrong," she whispered, and beneath that vast western sky, with stars scattered like silver across black velvet, their love stood firm against wind, against doubt, against every storm yet to come, unshaken. Summer came hard and dry upon the prairie, the kind of heat that split fence rails and left the earth cracked like an old plate dropped too many times. Grass turned brittle beneath relentless sun, and even the wind carried no mercy, only dust that crept into lungs and settled in the corners of weary eyes. The ranch had survived rustlers and storms, but drought was a slower enemy, one that gnawed steady and patient, and she watched the water level in the well sink inch by inch, while he rode farther each day, searching for patches of grazing land that had not yet surrendered to the blaze of sky. Whispers returned to town, not of pity this time, but of doubt. Men gathered outside the saloon claiming the ranch would fold before autumn. That love was a fine thing, but it did not fill troughs or fatten cattle. She heard it all when she went for supplies, their words drifting like flies around a wounded animal. Yet she did not bow her head. Instead, she studied the dry fields with thoughtful eyes and remembered stories. Her father once told of digging a secondary well near the cottonwoods where the soil held hidden moisture, and that evening when he returned exhausted and silent, she placed her idea before him, not as a plea but as a plan. He listened with the same respect he would give any seasoned ranch hand, nodding slow as she explained the lay of the land and the slope of earth near the trees. And though the risk was high and their funds worn thin as the soles of his boots, he agreed without hesitation, because trusting her had become as natural as trusting the rise of dawn. So they set to work side by side beneath a punishing sun, shovels biting into stubborn ground, hands blistering and backs aching, yet neither spoke of surrender. Days stretched long and unforgiving. Hired hands drifted away seeking easier wages elsewhere, leaving only the two of them and one loyal ranch hand, too stubborn to quit. Still they dug, sweat carving lines through dust on their skin, until one afternoon when hope felt near spent and muscles trembled from strain, her shovel struck damp earth with a sound different from the rest, softer, promising, and together they knelt, digging faster now, hearts pounding louder than any thunder they had faced before, until water seeped through soil and rose clear and shining in the pit they had carved from despair. The new well did not just save the cattle, it saved the spirit of the ranch. Grass near the cottonwoods grew green again first. Then farther out, life began to creep back across the fields, and neighbors who once doubted rode over to see with their own eyes, marveling at the stubborn pair who had wrestled survival from a dying summer. He never claimed the victory as his own. Instead, he told any who asked that it was her wisdom and grit that found the water, and she felt pride bloom in her chest, not from praise but from partnership. One evening, as sunset bled gold and crimson across the endless horizon, he took her riding to the far ridge, where the whole spread could be seen, cattle grazing calm, fences standing straight, smoke rising gentle from their chimney. He dismounted and helped her down with the same quiet courtesy he had shown the first day they wed. Only now there was no distance between them, only shared memory of storms and fire and doubt overcome. And as they stood shoulder to shoulder watching the land breathe steady once more, he spoke low and certain. "This ranch stands because we stand together, ma'am." She looked at him then, not as a woman rescued nor as a burden born from kindness, but as a wife equal in strength and spirit. "I was wrong that first night," she said softly, "thinking love had to be earned by perfection or paid for with sacrifice. But you showed me it grows from choice, from staying when staying is hard, from digging when the earth says no more." And her hand slipped into his, calloused palm fitting against calloused palm like two pieces of the same weathered puzzle. Years later, folks in town would tell the story of how that ranch survived storms and the cruelest drought in memory. They would speak of a cowboy steady as the North Star and a woman fierce as prairie wind. But what they would never fully grasp was the quiet truth that held it all together. That love is not pity dressed in noble words. It is work beneath a burning sun. It is standing firm when whispers rise. It is choosing each other again and again against every hardship the West can muster. And as the sun dipped low beyond the rolling range and night settled, gentle and sure, he brushed a kiss against her brow and she smiled without doubt, knowing now beyond all fear that she had been married, not out of pity but out of love, pure and unyielding as the wide open sky above them.